is going to about respiratory failure. So the class is going to be like, first we'll be discussing what is respiratory failure, and how can we differentiate between acute and chronic respiratory failures, what are the types, and what are the mechanisms and causes of each types, and how to proceed with it. So like I'll be touching only mainly the salient points that we need to know while managing a case, with some basic points about ventilator management in people with respiratory failure. Okay, so basically what is respiratory failure is, it's nothing but respiratory failure when you it is a condition in which our body system, that is respiratory system, fails to execute its gas exchanging function. That is main gas exchanging function will be it is involved in O2, and this O2 will come in and CO2 elimination. So either one of these two or both of it can be there, that we call it as respiratory failure. Okay, so respiratory failure, for definition sake, we actually divide this respiratory failure into hypoxemic respiratory failure and hypercapnic respiratory failure. By definition, hypoxic respiratory failure, you call it when arterial PaO2, that is partial pressure of oxygen, is less than, okay, it's when it is less than 55 mmHg. Okay, and FiO2 of more than or equal to 60 percentage. Okay, when with the room air, if the patient is having PaO2, you should not call it as respiratory failure, that is hypoxemic respiratory failure. Hypoxemic
Excuse me,
respiratory
sir.
failure you call when the PaO2 is,
Sir,
yeah,
sir,
yeah,
இது எதுவுமே தெரியல. ரெட் கலர், ஒயிட் கலர்ல எழுத முடியுமா?
yeah, okay.
அந்த திக்னஸ் கூட இன்க்ரீஸ் பண்ணலாம்னு நினைக்கிறேன் சார்.
Yeah, yeah. 5 mmHg at an FiO2 of more than or equal to 60 percentage of oxygen. Okay, when this criteria fits, we call the patient is to be in hypoxemic respiratory failure. So what is hypercapnic respiratory failure? In the sense, when PaCO2 is more than more than 45 mmHg. Okay, arterial partial pressure of oxygen, I mean carbon dioxide, when it's more than 45, we call it as hypercapnic respiratory failure. Okay, the thing is, a short brief about how to go about acute or chronic, then I will be discussing the types and mechanisms along with it. Okay, so basically, most of the times we'll be able to differentiate between acute and chronic respiratory failure. There will be some clues in ABG and other investigations, and many clinical clues through which you can actually differentiate a majority of patients. Whereas minority of patients will be inside the gray area, so that you cannot exactly differentiate them between acute or chronic respiratory failure. So when will you call? I mean, when can you consider a patient as acute respiratory failure? So the clinical history is very important. If the onset is very less, that is when it is less than, that is within 1 or 2 days of onset, then it will be mostly of acute respiratory failure, especially the type 1, that is hypoxemic respiratory failure. And the people with acute hypoxemic respiratory failure mostly won't be having any chronic signs of hypoxemia. So some of the chronic signs of hypoxemia that you can see will be this polycythemia and the manifestations of polycythemia, the presence of clubbing, and all these things won't be present mostly in patients with acute hypoxemia, whereas it can be present in people with chronic hypoxemia, especially the signs and symptoms of polycythemia can be present in people with chronic hypoxemic respiratory failure. And most of the times in ABG, we'll not be able to clinch a clue. Okay, most of the times the onset of the clinical picture and the presence or absence of polycythemia are most specific things which can help us to differentiate between acute or chronic respiratory failure of type 1. So how to differentiate between acute or chronic hypercapnic respiratory failure? In case of chronic or acute hypercapnic respiratory failure, what happens in the sense, so in people with chronic hypercapnic respiratory failure, we know that PCO2 in case of chronic hypoxemic respiratory failure is going to accumulate in the blood. Okay, that is nothing but CO2 retention. This CO2 is going to eventually get combined with H2O and carbon dioxide to produce carbonic acid, so which is responsible for acidosis. Okay, in these patients with acute hypercapnic respiratory failure, even a modest elevation of PaCO2 will be associated with a significant like acidosis. For example, even at the level of PaCO2 of 60, you can get a picture of ABG at 7.25 to 7.3 or even less in case of acute hypercapnic respiratory failure, because the buffer mechanisms and the compensatory mechanisms wouldn't have been sensitized for the change in the CO2 concentration. Whereas in case of chronic hypercapnic respiratory failure, these buffer systems and the compensatory systems, especially the renal compensatory system in the case of chronic respiratory failure, would have been fine-tuned so that even at level of PaCO2 like 120 or whatever, the patient pH will be in this range. Okay, that is 7.35 to 7.30. So with ABG, we can differentiate these two with this ABG. How about how we can go about the clinical history in the sense, even with some modest elevation of PaCO2 in acute respiratory failure, acute hypercapnic respiratory failure, the patient may manifest the symptoms of the CO2 narcosis. Okay, like if the patient is having the acute or chronic respiratory failure, even at the PaCO2 values of 100 or 120, the patient will be having some amount of mild to moderate level of narcosis. In case of acute respiratory failure, 100 is and all a high value, and the patient may even, you can find the patient stuporous or in coma. So that thing with sensorium and the features of CO2 narcosis, you can be able to differentiate. Next differentiating feature will be the features of carpal mail. Okay, whenever there is most of the times the chronic respiratory hypercapnic respiratory failure will be associated with some kind of lung pathology, right? So these patients might be having chronic hypercapnic respiratory failure, might be having features of carpal mail. So okay, so this is not like an exact line where you can differentiate these two patients exactly. Okay, there are so many gray zones, but if you keep these points in mind, most of the times you'll be able to find out whether the process is acute or chronic. And more than all these things, history is very important. That is onset of symptoms and how long has the patient been having these symptoms, and the medication history or whatever. Because COPD and all, we know the history that is chronic and everything. Whereas in case of acute pulmonary edema and many causes which we'll be discussing now, will be having some kind of an acute or chronic or acute on chronic manifestations. Okay, with this, now we are moving to the types. Okay, so types of respiratory failure. Conventionally, this respiratory failure, by the consensus of many international organizations, we divide this respiratory failure into mainly, okay, type 1, okay, type 2, type 3, type 4. Okay, so these are the four basic clinical things that we can under which we can study respiratory failure. Type 1 is hypoxemic respiratory failure. Okay, type 1 is hypercapnic respiratory failure. Type 3 is, it's almost like an hypoxemic respiratory failure. It's nothing but perioperative respiratory failure. That is the respiratory failure that we get during the perioperative, especially the post-operative period. And type 4 is sepsis related, or sorry, type 4 is shock related respiratory failure. Okay, so why type 3 gets us specific mention? Okay, even though I told like it's nothing but it will have all the manifestations, ABG findings and the management similar to type 1, that is hypoxemic respiratory failure. But why we have like a separate classification for this type 3 respiratory failure, in the sense there will be a few peculiar features that you can find in these patients with the type 3 respiratory failure. So what are the causes of these patients, that is type 3 respiratory failure, in the sense post-operative period, especially in abdominal surgeries, you may get it, especially when the incision involves the upper part of abdomen. Okay, so whenever there is there a prolonged endotracheal intubation, or if the incisions involving the upper part of abdomen, there will be some amount of diaphragmatic push towards the upwards, that is towards the lungs. So there will be reduced FRC in post-operative period. And the anesthetic effect, the patient might not have recovered from the anesthetic effect, so he might be hypoventilating. Okay, hypoventilating, that would actually can worsen the hypoxemic respiratory failure. And the patient might be having copious airway secretions. Okay, copious airway secretions due to effect of surgery or anesthesia, through which the patient will be again can, all these things, not like, it's not like a single thing that is operating here. Many different causes operate here to produce the patient, to cause type 3 respiratory failure in perioperative period. And most commonly, I told, decreased FRC due to the diaphragm mechanism, anesthesia things, mainly common with upper abdominal incisions, and airway secretions also contributes to it. And this is very common in people with obesity and ascites. Okay, because already they'll be having a reduced FRC due to diaphragmatic push, right? So even a small amount of these things can precipitate respiratory failure in this subgroup of people. But again, the management is going to be similar to type 1 respiratory failure, like type 1 respiratory failure, but this needs a specific thing because it has an own set of its precipitating factors and causes. Okay, type 3. What is type 4 respiratory failure is nothing but it is shock related respiratory failure. Shock can be any type of shock. Okay, it could be an hypovolemic, or very commonly it is mostly because of septic shock and cardiogenic shock. What happens, like shock is nothing but it is a state of poor organ perfusion, right? So again, organ or tissue perfusion, most precisely it is poor tissue perfusion. Respiratory muscles are also tissues, okay, including diaphragm or the other muscles, accessory muscles of respiration. They also need some amount of perfusion to act. So if there is a presence of if there's a presence of shock, these muscles will be considered as non-vital organs by the our circulatory system. Okay, because they redistribute blood mostly to the important organs like brain, heart, kidneys, liver, or whatever, and remaining things like muscles, skin, other tissues will be receiving less amount of blood. And diaphragmatic muscles and muscles of respiration will also get involved in this process, causing respiratory failure. Okay, it's again a variant of type 2 respiratory failure. Okay, but it needs a special mention because it is very common in people with shock. Okay, this is about type 3 and type 4. They don't have a particular thing, because most of the type 3 management coincides with the type 1 thing, and type 4 management mostly coincides with type 2 respiratory failure. Okay, so now we are going to move about how to approach each kind of respiratory failure. Okay, we are going to move into the approach towards each kind of respiratory failure. So first we'll talk about type 1. Okay, type 1, otherwise called as hypoxemic respiratory failure, where there will be reduction in PO2, okay, that is PaO2, normal or decreased PaCO2. Okay, these are cardinal things that you can commonly, you can encounter in all kind of people with type 1 respiratory failure. Okay, type 1 respiratory failure, most of the causes of type 1, okay, of acute onset. What are the causes of this hypoxemic respiratory failure? Okay, what are the causes of this hypoxemic respiratory failure? We have to go about each cause. First, there will be hypoxemic respiratory failure. The causes you can divide like, see, this is the I am drawing the lungs. Okay, the airway with lungs. Bear with me because I am very poor at drawing. So let's imagine these are lungs. Okay, these are alveoli. This is an alveoli. Okay, alveoli with a terminal bronchiole. Okay, these are the alveolar capillaries, and this part is interstitium. There you can see this interstitium. Okay, okay, this part is interstitium. Okay, so this hypoxemic respiratory failure, it can be because of, okay, it can be because of various mechanisms. First it could be because of increased CO2, increased fraction of inspirated oxygen. Okay, this, like, let's consider a patient living in high altitude. Okay, our FiO2 normally in our ambient temperature and environment is 21%. 21%. That's it's a normal thing that we are inspiring. Whereas in case of high altitude, where there will be altered barometric pressure, there will be low FiO2. So that is the reason why these people who are living in hills might be having, they are very prone, they'll be having polycythemia because of this chronic hypoxic insult. So decreased FiO2 can be because of this natural high altitude thing, or it could be secondary to decrease supplemented oxygen through your ventilator or oxygen delivering devices. Okay, decreased FiO2 means both the things. It includes both the things. That is, decreased oxygen the patient is getting from the environment or through the device. Okay, that is first thing. Second thing could be hypoventilation. Okay, just keep this thing in mind. Hypoventilation, most of the things in hypoventilation, most of the causes of hypoventilation will actually cause type 2 respiratory failure. Whereas whenever there is an initiation of hypoventilation, the patient will be having type 1 respiratory failure at the onset. It is mainly because CO2 is easily diffusible across the alveoli than oxygen. Okay, this CO2 is almost 20 times more diffusible than O2. Okay, so initially our body will be able to take care of the CO2 elimination in case of hypoventilation. So for few hours, the patient might be having type 1 respiratory failure, whereas eventually all these patients with hypoventilation will progress to type 2 respiratory failure. Okay, so second thing. Third thing is VQ mismatch. So we'll be discussing each one separately. Okay, I'll discuss each one separate. Fourth thing is shunt. Okay, fourth thing is shunt. Fifth one is diffusion abnormality. Okay, so we can divide the causes and we can go about that. We can actually keep these things in mind and then we can go to the diagnosis. Like, I'm discussing these things to apply this to the clinical thing, to apply this theory to the patient when you are seeing a patient in ICU or wherever. Okay, so broadly we can divide the causes like this. Okay, so going to each causes. So we have discussed about that first cause, that is low FiO2. Okay, low FiO2 we have discussed. Second thing, hypoventilation also we discussed. Now we are coming to the hypoventilation also we discussed. Third thing, that is VQ mismatch. Okay, so we can keep this, we can remember these things like no or less oxygen. The patient is not able to take up the available oxygen. The patient is taking up the oxygen inside the alveoli, but due to VQ mismatch it is being wasted, or due to shunt it is being wasted, or there are no all these things, but taken up oxygen cannot diffuse across the alveoli. Okay, we can remember these causes in this order. Okay, so now we are going to VQ mismatch. What is VQ mismatch? What is basically VQ? VQ is nothing but it's a ventilation perfusion ratio. Okay, what is normally these are lungs. We have our lungs here. Okay, we have our lungs here. So as I told, this is an alveoli. Okay, this is so this is an alveoli. We have RTL in the veins of alveoli. Okay, see, I mean of the alveolar capillaries in the interstitium. So, so what happens in the sense? VQ mismatch. What is VQ? That is V is ventilation. Ventilation we know, that is oxygen carbon dioxide gas exchange mechanism is ventilation. Perfusion is nothing but blood flow. Okay, this is not equal in every place of the lung. Okay, for example, when we this perfusion is actually gravity dependent. So perfusion will always be better in lower lung zones. Okay, whereas ventilation will always be better in upper lung zones. So VQ is always higher than 1 in case of upper parts because ventilation is better than perfusion. Whereas in lower lung zones, it's vice versa. So it will be more than, less than 1, okay, in lower lung zones. On average, when you take up all the zones of lung, the average VQ in a normal healthy person is 0.85. So what is this VQ mismatch? Okay, so what is this VQ mismatch in the sense? The patient is having a adequate perfusion, but is not getting adequate ventilation. Or the patient is having adequate ventilation, but is not getting adequate perfusion, because both the things are important. Let's take, this is the alveoli. The oxygen is coming inside here. Okay, it has to get exchanged with the blood vessel here. So blood has to flow here, right? For exchange of this oxygen, because carbon dioxide are nothing but they are exchanged with the hemoglobin. Hemoglobin plays a very important role in this oxygen carbon dioxide mechanism. We would have read many things, right? Oxygen dissociation curve, Haldane effect, in all these things. The main, it's not, when we talk about blood, it's not the blood, it's the hemoglobin which is inside the blood, which is responsible for all these exchange mechanisms, right? So the oxygen is being taken inside and it's going to be taken up by your hemoglobin. Okay, what is being taken up by your hemoglobin, and CO2 is going to release it from inside the thing. So what happens? So both ventilation in form of oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange and blood flow in form of perfusion are required for an adequate gas exchange thing. If there is a problem with ventilation, let's take about the problems with ventilation. That is, the oxygen is not moving inside the lungs properly. Okay, lungs properly, but perfusion is happening. Okay, that is, this is being affected. Okay, but perfusion is happening. Even if the perfusion is good, there is no available oxygen which can be taken up by the hemoglobin that is presented by the perfusing blood. Okay, but CO2 can still be eliminated outside. Okay, CO2 can still be eliminated outside, again because of its decreased affinity. Because of it has altered affinity and more diffusion through the alveoli. Okay, so if the ventilation is less, again it will be leading to type 1 respiratory failure, and eventually it will end up with type 2 respiratory failure later. If there is perfusion mismatch, let's consider a patient with pulmonary embolism. Okay, let's consider a patient with pulmonary embolism where there's obstruction to blood flow to the pulmonary artery and hence into this pulmonary microvasculature. Okay, so when there is no perfusion, okay, what happens? Again, the gas exchange will not be happening, leading to respiratory failure. So this is about ventilation perfusion. Okay, then how to differentiate all these things? I'll be talking about that in next. I'll be talking. So this is EQ mismatch mechanism. So next mechanism that is existing here is the shunt mechanism. So what is shunt basically? Okay, what is shunt basically? Shunt is nothing but the blood, that is the oxygen is actually flowing into the it is actually getting wasted. Why it is getting wasted? Because the blood that is carrying the deoxygenated blood, the blood that is carrying the deoxygenated is not reaching the lungs, and it is bypassing the lungs through via various shunts. Okay, shunt mechanisms. So what are these things? I'll make it clear now. Okay, so shunt we can divide into the anatomical shunt, okay, and physiological shunts. Okay, what is this anatomical shunts? So anatomical shunts are normally present in our blood. Okay, normally it is present in situated in our blood. Okay, airway, basically airway we can divide into conduction airways and exchange airways. Okay, most of the initial generation of airways are our conduction airways, and the terminal bronchiole, respiratory bronchiole and alveoli forms the exchange airways. Okay, so here the blood will flow normally into the conducting airways and also to the exchange airways, but here the perfusion is there. but gas exchange will not happen in the conducting airways. Okay, so the blood is flowing in the part where there is no gas exchange. Okay, the blood is flowing to and fro from the part where there is no gas exchange. So this is a kind of physiological shunt that is normally present in our body. Okay, that is between the bronchial circulation, bronchial artery and vein that is supplying the conducting airways. Okay, that is supplying the conducting airways. It is normally present in the bed. And what are the second kind of physiological shunt is nothing. So normally the blood that is the venous return of the heart is actually carried by these coronary veins, the coronary sinus, and again it will go to the azygous venous system and it will be returned back to the coronary arteries. There are small amount of vein called Thebesian vein. Thebesian veins are nothing but small veins which are present almost in the all chamber of the hearts. There are few Thebesian veins in the left ventricle. These Thebesian veins directly empties into the left ventricle. Okay, that is they directly they directly empty the this venous blood into the left ventricle. This physiological shunt is less than 1 to 2% of our total cardiac output. So under physiological condition, they won't manifest normally. Okay, so this is the shunt. Shunt refers to an entry of blood into the systemic arterial system without going into the ventilated areas of lungs. Okay, that is the definition of the shunt. That is again, it refers to the entry of blood into the systemic arterial system without going into the ventilated part of the lungs. I'll be making it simple now. Okay, this is physiological shunt. What are anatomical shunts? Let's take about congenital cyanotic heart diseases. Okay, congenital cyanotic heart diseases where there is a shunt. What shunt is happening? The shunt is happening between that is right to left shunt. Okay, that is right to left shunt. We can take about anything, TOF, or whatever. We can take any kind of Epstein's anomaly or whatever. In these things, these are anatomical shunts. What is happening? See, this is the blood flows from because of shunt, the blood directly flows into the left part of the heart without going into the pulmonary circulation. So it is bypassing the pulmonary circulation. Otherwise, it is bypassing the ventilated areas of the lungs, right? So this is an example of anatomical shunts. Or if there are, if there is congenital anomalous connection between the pulmonary artery and vein, it is also an example for anatomical shunt. So what does the shunt has benefit in our clinical scenario? Okay, let's take a patient with acute pulmonary edema. Okay, let's take a patient with acute pulmonary edema. So this is the patient with acute pulmonary edema. We are drawing mini alveoli here. Okay, the alveoli is filled with so much of fluid. Okay, the alveoli is flooded with fluid in pulmonary edema. Or let's take pulmonary hemorrhage, or you can take also fibrosing alveolitis. In all these patients, it is filled with some kind of material in the alveoli. Okay, what happens here? The oxygen normally enters into the, the ventilation is good, the patient ambient air is good, the patient is intaking oxygen. But what happens here? The perfusion is also happening normally, but the oxygen cannot enter the capillaries normally because of this so see, the O2 is coming, but it's not being pathology that is affecting alveoli. It acts similar to this shunt mechanism. Okay, it acts similar to this shunt mechanism, resulting in the type 1 respiratory failure. Okay, so how to go about these things? Okay, how to go about things in the sense, so first one is about, and the final cause we discussed was, so first thing we discussed, second is hypoventilation, PQ mismatch, fourth one is shunt. Okay, fifth one is the diffusion defect. The diffusion defect is very simple. Again, in case of pulmonary edema, like three things: ventilation, perfusion, shunt, diffusion. All these things will happen hand on hand to cause a patient will land up with type 1 respiratory failure. How VQ mismatch happens here? Ventilation is not happening properly here. The sense of being exchanged, even though that is perfusion is there, but ventilation is not there. Okay, that is causing VQ mismatch here. Why shunt? Because the blood is bypassing. Okay, the blood is bypassing the that is blood is passing through the under ventilated alveoli. Okay, under ventilated alveoli, and without getting proper oxygenation is entering into the venous side. Okay, that is into the venous side. So this is a shunt thing. Well, how diffusion defect happens? Simple. There is so much of fluid here, so oxygen cannot diffuse properly. Carbon dioxide has more diffusion capacity than oxygen, so that it can get easily escaped in these patients, whereas oxygen will get stuck here, resulting in diffusion defect. So how to differentiate each one of these things? So okay, to differentiate these things, I am going to introduce a new parameter. Okay, I'm going to introduce new parameter called, okay, A minus I'm going to introduce something known as A minus A gradient. Okay, A minus A gradient. The capital A stands for the alveolar oxygen, and small a stands for the arterial oxygen. Okay, that is A minus A gradient. Okay, so we'll discuss the formula. PaO2 we know, that is A minus A is nothing but PaO2 minus P small aO2. PaO2 we will get through ABG. So how to derive this PaO2? That is partial pressure of alveolar oxygen. Okay, so PaO2 is given by a formula. Okay, PaO2 is given by a formula, that is FiO2. PaO2 is given, okay, A minus A is nothing but PaO2 minus PaO2. So PaO2 is given by formula, that is FiO2 into atmospheric pressure minus water pressure minus PaCO2 divided by 0.8. This 0.8 is a respiratory constant. Okay, this 0.8 is a respiratory constant. Okay, so we'll derive like FiO2 we'll get by our thing. For example, if the patient is breathing in room air, the patient will be having an FiO2 of 0.21, otherwise 21%. 21% is nothing but 21 by 100, that is 0.21. Okay, whereas this PATM, that is PATM is actually fixed thing. Okay, whenever the patient is taking an atmospheric pressure, normal atmospheric pressure is 760. Okay, it is a fixed thing that is derived basically. And PH2O is also fixed, that is 47. These both are fixed numbers. Okay, whereas FiO2 you will get, and PaCO2 you will get by ABG. Let's take the patient's PaCO2 is 50. Okay, so divided by 0.8, you will get a value, right? This is PaO2. So you have to calculate something known as A minus A gradient. We'll get a, let's take this is an this value comes to 80. Okay, and PaO2 in this patient with a type 1 respiratory failure, let's take it as 50. Okay, so A minus A is nothing but 80 minus 50 is equal to 30. Okay, normally this A minus A gradient in normal people is between 5 to 10, in the sense this amount of oxygen is all this very small amount of oxygen can be under replaced in the blood. PaO2 means the what indicates it is direct indicator of oxygen that is present in the alveoli, whereas PaO2 indicates the oxygen that has diffused across the alveoli to get into the arterial blood. Okay, that to get into the arterial blood. So very small amount of oxygen can be wasted because of the small amount of shunts and small amount of VQ mechanism that is happening in our body. Okay, that is normally 5 to 10 is acceptable. Okay, that is A minus A value of 5 to 10 is normally acceptable, and up to 5 to 10 is normal, and up to 20 it is acceptable. Okay, up to 20 is acceptable. When it becomes more than 20, what does it mean? When it becomes more than 20, what does it mean? PaO2 is okay. Okay, it is good, but PaO2 is not good. That means the air is normally entering into the alveoli, but due to any of the mechanisms like VQ mismatch, shunt, or diffusion defect, it is not being, it is not getting into the circulation. Okay, so with P minus A ratio, we can differentiate the causes of respiratory failure. Okay, so the algorithm goes like this. What is PaO? I mean, PaO2 minus PaO2. That is A minus A ratio. A minus A gradient. Sorry, ratio. It's not ratio. It's a gradient. When it is high or normal. Okay, if it is high, it could be because of, okay, it could be because of the patient is having, it could be because of first two things that we were discussing. Okay, first two things that we are discussing, that is could be because of low FiO2 or some amount of hypoventilation. Sorry. So this could be increased, it could be normal or increased. Normal, or sometimes it's very rarely, it cannot be mostly decreased, it will be normal. Okay, so let's take like this. Type 1, we are handling a patient with type 1 respiratory failure. Now we are going to calculate A minus A ratio. Normal in the sense, it means the alveolar oxygen is also less, so that PaO2 is also less. So that means it could be because of decreased FiO2 or due to hypoventilation. Means the alveoli itself has less amount of oxygen. Increased means what? Alveoli is having good amount of oxygen, but due to something like VQ mismatch, shunt, or diffusion defect, it is not entering into the blood. Okay, this is the alveoli. Due to some mechanism, it is not entering into the blood. That is, it is not becoming as PaO2. That means A is okay, but PaO2 is very less. That means this gradient will be increased, right? So the causes will go like this. It could be because of VQ mismatch, shunt mechanism, or diffusion defects. Okay, and most of the causes of type 1 respiratory failure, one or these two, I mean, one or many of these mechanisms that we have discussed can be coexistent together. Okay, so what are the common causes of type 1 respiratory failure? Okay, type 1 respiratory failure, it could be pneumonia. Okay, that is pulmonary edema. Edema could be cardiogenic or non-cardiogenic, otherwise called as ARDS. Okay, it could be secondary to pulmonary hemorrhage. Okay, it could be secondary to pulmonary fibrosis. Pulmonary embolism, as I told, pulmonary embolism will cause VQ mismatch by decreasing the perfusion. Okay, and there could be fibrosing alveolitis. There are actually difference between pulmonary fibrosis and fibrosing alveolitis. It's actually out of scope of this today's discussion. So these are like 98% of the causes of type 1 respiratory failure. So again, we know in pneumonia what happens. The pneumonia, due to inflammatory process, the alveoli will be flooded with inflammatory infiltrates. So again, they will be causing the places of VQ mismatch and diffusion defect. The same happens in pulmonary edema. As in pulmonary hemorrhage, it's again due to diffusion defect or VQ mismatch defect. And pulmonary fibrosis, most of the it's mainly because of diffusion defect in pulmonary fibrosis. Pulmonary embolism, it's mainly because of VQ mismatch, whereas where the perfusion is getting affected more than ventilation. Okay, and fibrosing alveolitis, again, it's mainly because of diffusion defect. Okay, so this is about type 1 respiratory failure, and type 1 respiratory failure doesn't have any big, you have to manage the specific condition. Okay, after entering into an algorithm, by working out the algorithm and asking the history and examining the patient, you have to come to a conclusion what the patient is suffering from. Okay, you can actually ask an history where the patient is living, or the patient might be having decreased oxygen delivery devices, you have to look over it. Or patient might be having hypoventilation because of many causes, which we'll be discussing type 2 respiratory failure. Or the patient might be in pulmonary edema. Pulmonary edema and all we can easily find out. A patient might be in ARDS. ARDS we can also mostly will be able to find out. Pulmonary hemorrhage most of the time will be associated with hemoptysis, and pulmonary embolism will again present with a classical history. Okay, so most of the times underlying cause has to be treated, and ventilator management plays a role, especially in ARDS. Okay, ARDS was a separate topic which was discussed already in the class, where we have something known as lung protective ventilation. Okay, lung protective ventilation, where we, and also recruitment ventilation. We call it as lung protective recruitment ventilation. We do that to improve ARDS. So there are specific strategies, particularly in ARDS, which were actually discussed in the previous class. So main thing here is you have to diagnose what is the problem, and you have to treat the condition appropriately by giving antibiotics, diuretics, or whatever, and patient will be relieved of this respiratory failure. And ventilator setting, most of the times target an SpO2 of 92. Okay, don't over jealously give oxygen. Even 90 to 92 is fine. Okay, why I'm telling this in the sense, I think most of you might be knowing this. We have something known as oxygen dissociation curve, right? This is oxygen dissociation curve. It's usually signet shape. This oxygen dissociation curve is, this contains PaO2 and this contains Hb oxygen content. Okay, so that means when the PaO2 increases, what happens? The oxygen carrying capacity of the blood also increases. But once it reaches a particular value, the curve becomes a plateau. Okay, this actually occurs between a saturation of 90 to 94. Okay, after that, even if the patient is, if you give more oxygen more than 94, it's not going to cause any effect in this ODC curve. So always target an oxygen of 90 to 94, and always give FiO2 low as possible to avoid oxygen radical injury to the lungs and to the other tissues. Okay, especially in people with various conditions which are predisposed to this oxygen radical injury. Okay, with this, now we are moving into type 2 respiratory failure. Okay, I think I was able to summarize most of the points in type 1 respiratory failure. So now we are going to type 2 respiratory failure, which is often a challenging thing in our clinical practice. So here I will be introducing few terms which you can use in our ICU. I think most of you, even I haven't heard of those terms until few months back. Okay, I'll be introducing those terms which you can use actually in IMCU to evaluate these patients. So how to go about type 2 respiratory failure? As I told, type 2 is nothing but one thing in type 1 respiratory failure I forgot to tell. In people with elevated A-A, I told it could be because of VQ mismatch, it could be because of shunt, it could be because of diffusion defect. How to differentiate between VQ mismatch and the shunt in the sense? Okay, when you increase FiO2 in case of VQ mismatch, okay, when you increase FiO2 in case of VQ mismatch, the patient's PaO2 may, here the problem is there with ventilation. Okay, when you offer more oxygen than the intended thing, there can, when you offer more FiO2 than the intended thing, sometimes PaO2 can improve, whereas it won't happen in shunt, because whatever the oxygen that you are going to give, it is going to wasted in shunt. Okay, through that we can differentiate between these two processes. Okay, between these two processes, which is diffusion defect, mostly we have to go by clinical history and most of the time the